The wine glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of Les Bernardin, as Jordan stood up, straightened his tie, and announced to our anniversary dinner companions, "I'm sorry, everyone, but I can't do this anymore. Lauren deserves better than living a lie." What he didn't know, what none of them knew as they watched him walk out of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, was that in exactly 30 minutes, I would stand up, raise my own glass, and deliver a toast that would not only silence every patron in that restaurant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But completely destroy the carefully constructed world he thought he controlled. Because while Jordan believed he was abandoning a helpless housewife who depended on his tech executive's salary, he had no idea that the woman he was leaving owned the building we were sitting in, the company he worked for, and held the power to unravel every lie he'd built his life upon. The evening had started like every anniversary dinner we'd shared over the past 8 years. Jordan had made reservations at Les Bernardin, the same upscale French restaurant where he'd proposed, where we'd celebrated every major milestone, where he felt most important surrounded by the city's elite. He'd chosen our usual corner table, the one with the perfect view of the harbor lights twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows, where he could see and be seen by the other power players who frequented this establishment. I had arrived early, as was my habit, wearing the emerald green dress he'd bought me last Christmas, the one he said brought out my eyes and made me look like the perfect corporate wife. My hair was styled in the elegant updo he preferred, my makeup flawless, my smile practiced and serene. To any observer, I was exactly what I appeared to be, Lauren Martinez, devoted wife of rising tech star Jordan Hayes, the supportive woman behind the successful man. But as I sat at that table, sipping champagne and watching Jordan work the room with his usual calculated charm, I was thinking about the documents hidden in my purse, the same documents that would change everything in less than an hour. Jordan finally joined me after 20 minutes of networking, sliding into his seat with the satisfied smile of a man who'd just closed another important deal. "Sorry about that, babe," he said, barely glancing at me as he signaled the waiter. "Had to speak with Marcus Chen. He's considering our proposal for the downtown development project." I nodded and smiled, the same supportive gesture I'd perfected over 8 years of marriage. "That's wonderful, honey. I know how important that project is to you." What I didn't say was that Marcus Chen was actually my client, not his. That the downtown development project Jordan thought he was competing for had already been awarded to my architectural firm 6 months ago. That while Jordan believed I spent my days volunteering at charity events and managing our household, I had been building one of the most successful sustainable architecture practices on the East Coast. "You look beautiful tonight," Jordan said, finally focusing on me with the attention I'd once craved. But now, knowing what I knew, his compliments felt hollow, calculated. "I'm glad we could do this, just the two of us. It feels like we never get time alone anymore." The irony wasn't lost on me. We rarely spent time together, because Jordan had been systematically scheduling his life to avoid me. The late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the business trips that seemed to multiply every month, I'd attributed them to his ambitious nature until 3 weeks ago, when I'd learned the truth. 8 years, I said, raising my glass in what he assumed was a toast to our marriage. "It's amazing how much can change in 8 years." Jordan clinked his glass against mine, completely missing the double meaning in my words. "Here's to 8 more, he said, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the absurdity of it all. The appetizers arrived, Jordan's usual order of oysters and my salmon tartare, and we fell into the comfortable rhythm of anniversary dinner conversation. He told me about his latest projects, his promotion prospects, his plans for expanding his team. I listened and responded appropriately, playing the role I'd mastered so completely that even I had forgotten it was a performance. "Actually," Jordan said, setting down his fork and adopting the serious expression I'd learned to recognize over the years, "there's something I need to tell you. Something important." My heart began to race, though not for the reason he expected. I knew what was coming. I'd been preparing for this moment for 3 weeks, ever since I'd discovered the truth about his double life. "Lauren, these past few months, hell, these past few years, I've been thinking a lot about what I want from life. about whether we're still good for each other. I maintained my composure, even as every instinct told me to throw my wine in his face. "What are you saying, Jordan?" He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch gentle but distant. "I'm saying that we've grown apart. You're an amazing woman, but I don't think we want the same things anymore. You're content with your volunteer work and your book clubs, and that's fine. But I need someone who understands my ambitions. Someone who can be a real partner in building something significant." The audacity was breathtaking. Jordan was describing someone who could be a real partner to a woman who had built a multi-million-dollar business, while he thought she was arranging flowers for charity events. "Someone like Colette?" I asked quietly. The color drained from Jordan's face, his hand jerked away from mine as if I'd burned him. "What did you say?" "Colette Morrison. Your business development manager, the woman you've been seeing for the past 14 months. The woman you've taken on every one of those business trips you told me about. The woman you've been building a life with, while lying to my face every single day." Jordan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance, servers moving between tables, wine glasses clinking, soft conversations creating a backdrop of civilized normalcy that contrasted sharply with the bomb I'd just detonated at our table. "How did you?" he started, then stopped himself. "Lauren, I can explain."
"No need," I said, reaching into my purse and withdrawing a thick manila envelope.
"I know about the apartment you rented for her on Fifth Avenue. I know about the vacation you took to Tuscany last month, when you told me you were at a conference in Denver. I know about the engagement ring you bought 3 weeks ago."
Jordan stared at the envelope as if it contained a live snake. "You hired a private investigator?"
I laughed, a sound that held no humor.
"Oh, Jordan, you still don't understand, do you?"
"You think the little wife needed to hire someone to uncover your secrets?" That's when he stood up. That's when he straightened his tie and delivered the speech I'd been expecting, the one designed to make him look like the noble party in our divorce, the one that painted me as the dependent wife who couldn't appreciate his ambitions, who was holding him back from his true potential. "I'm sorry, everyone," he announced to our table, and the surrounding diners who had turned to watch our obvious confrontation, "but I can't do this anymore. Lauren deserves better than living a lie." And then he walked out, leaving me sitting alone at our anniversary table with the envelope in my hands, and a restaurant full of curious eyes watching my every move. But Jordan Hayes had just made the biggest mistake of his life, because in exactly 30 minutes, when the shock wore off and the whispers died down, I was going to stand up and deliver a toast that would reveal exactly who Lauren Martinez really was, and it would change everything. The silence that followed Jordan's dramatic exit stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the weight of curious stares from neighboring tables, the whispered conversations of people who had just witnessed what they assumed was a wealthy man abandoning his trophy wife. The server approached hesitantly, unsure whether to clear Jordan's place setting or pretend nothing had happened. "Ma'am, would you like me to?" he began softly. "Leave everything as it is," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And please bring me another glass of the Domaine de la Romane Conti, the 2015. His eyebrows rose slightly at my request for a wine that cost more per glass than most people spent on an entire dinner, but he nodded and retreated. Around me, the restaurant's elegant atmosphere continued unchanged, but I could sense the undercurrent of speculation rippling through the dining room. "Poor thing," they were probably thinking. "How humiliating to be left like that in public. What will she do now without her husband's income to support her lifestyle?" If only they knew. I opened the manila envelope and spread its contents across the white tablecloth, organizing the documents with the same methodical precision I used when presenting architectural plans to clients. Bank statements showing accounts Jordan had never known existed, business registration papers for Martinez Sustainable Design, the firm I'd built from nothing over the past 6 years, property deeds that would shock him to his core, and at the bottom of the pile, the document that would destroy every assumption he'd made about our marriage and my capability. The sommelier arrived with my wine, performing the ritual of presentation and tasting with professional courtesy, despite the obvious drama that had just unfolded. As he poured the deep burgundy liquid into my glass, I caught sight of my reflection in the restaurant's mirrored wall. The woman looking back at me appeared composed, elegant, untouchable, but I could see the fire burning behind my eyes, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 8 years of suppressed ambition finally ready to break free. "Excuse me," said a soft voice beside me. I looked up to see an elderly woman from the neighboring table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression kind but concerned. "I hope you don't mind my intrusion, dear, but I couldn't help but notice. Are you all right?" That was a terrible way for any man to treat his wife. I smiled at her, genuinely touched by the concern from a stranger. "Thank you for asking. Actually, I'm better than I've been in years." She looked puzzled, probably expecting tears or devastation instead of the calm confidence I radiated. "I'm Mary Whitfield," she said, extending a jeweled hand. "My husband and I own several restaurants in the city. If you need assistance, a recommendation for legal counsel, perhaps, I'd be happy to help." Mary Whitfield. I knew the name, of course. She and her late husband had built an empire of fine dining establishments, including the very restaurant where we sat. What she didn't know was that I'd been the architect behind the renovation of their flagship location 3 years ago, working under my maiden name and through a consultant to maintain my privacy. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Whitfield. I'm Lauren Martinez. Well, I suppose I'll be going back to Martinez soon enough." I gestured to the chair Jordan had vacated. "Would you care to join me? I have a feeling this evening is about to become much more interesting." Intrigued, Mary accepted my invitation, settling into Jordan's abandoned seat with the grace of someone accustomed to navigating social complexities. Her husband, a distinguished man with kind eyes, followed suit, both of them clearly curious about the mysterious woman who seemed remarkably composed after such a public humiliation. "Martinez," Mary repeated thoughtfully. "Why does that name sound familiar?" I reached across the table and handed her one of my business cards, elegant black cardstock with silver lettering that read Martinez Sustainable Design. "Lauren Martinez, Principal Architect." Her eyes widened as recognition dawned. "You're the architect who designed the new Whitfield Plaza," she breathed. "The sustainable building that won the International Design Award last year." "Among other projects," I confirmed, taking a sip of my wine, "including the renovation of Le Bernardin that you're sitting in right now." The pieces were falling into place for Mary, and I could see the exact moment she realized the magnitude of what she'd just witnessed. This wasn't a helpless wife being abandoned by her breadwinner husband. This was a successful businesswoman whose spouse had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. "My dear," Mary said slowly, "does your husband know about your accomplishments?" I laughed, a sound that held 8 years of suppressed frustration and newfound freedom. "Jordan thinks I spend my days arranging charity luncheons and attending book clubs. He has no idea that Martinez Sustainable Design has been his company's primary competitor for the past 3 years. He doesn't know that I own the building where Tech Forward Solutions, his company, leases their offices. And he certainly doesn't know that the downtown development project he's been desperately trying to land was awarded to my firm 6 months ago." Mary's husband leaned forward, his expression shifting from sympathy to something approaching awe. "You've been living a double life." "Not by choice," I admitted. "When Jordan and I met, I was just starting my career." He was supportive initially, but as his own success grew, he became dismissive of my ambitions. He started making comments about how I should focus on supporting his career, how having 2 demanding jobs in one family was impractical. So I learned to keep my professional life separate. I worked under my maiden name, used a different office address, built my client base through word of mouth and careful networking. The irony was exquisite. While Jordan had been climbing the corporate ladder at Tech Forward, believing himself to be the household's primary earner, my firm employed 47 people, had completed projects in 12 countries, and generated revenue that exceeded his annual salary by a factor of 10. "But why hide it?" Mary asked. "Why not simply divorce him years ago, if he couldn't appreciate your success?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself countless times during the lonely nights, when Jordan was supposedly working late, but was actually building a relationship with Colette. "Because I loved him," I said simply. "Or I loved who he used to be." I kept thinking he'd change, that he'd remember the man who once encouraged my dreams instead of dismissing them. I picked up another document from the pile, the private investigator's report, that had shattered my last illusions about my marriage. Photos of Jordan and Colette, at romantic dinners, vacation pictures from trips I'd been excluded from, credit card statements showing jewelry purchases that had never made their way to me. What changed? Mary's husband asked gently. 3 weeks ago, I discovered he was planning to leave me for his assistant. Not just leave, he was going to divorce me and claim that I was financially dependent on him, that I deserved minimal spousal support because I'd never contributed to our joint success. He was going to paint me as a kept woman who'd lived off his hard work. The restaurant around us had returned to its normal rhythm, other diners having moved on from the drama at our table. But I could sense that Mary and her husband understood they were witnessing something significant, not just the end of a marriage, but the emergence of a woman who had been hiding in plain sight for years. So what happens now? Mary asked. I smiled, raising my glass in a mock toast to Jordan's empty chair. Now, Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to stand up in your beautiful restaurant and make sure that everyone here, and everyone Jordan knows, understands exactly who Lauren Martinez really is. The wine tasted like victory on my tongue. Mary leaned forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. How did it all begin? You and Jordan, I mean. You must have loved him deeply to hide so much of yourself for so long. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the candlelight as memories I'd tried to bury came flooding back. We met at a university career fair 9 years ago. I was in my final semester of architecture school, and he was a recent computer science graduate, working for a startup that was showcasing their new urban planning software. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the musty auditorium air, hear the buzz of ambitious students networking with potential employers. I was at the Sustainable Building Consortium booth, explaining my thesis project on eco-friendly affordable housing, when this incredibly handsome guy in an ill-fitting suit approached. He started asking these thoughtful questions about how technology could support green architecture, about whether there were ways to integrate smart building systems with sustainable design. Mary's husband smiled, love at first sight. Not quite, I laughed, but it was a softer sound now, tinged with the bitter sweetness of what we'd lost. He was charming, but I was focused on my career. I'd grown up watching my mother sacrifice her own ambitions to support my father's business, and I was determined never to make that mistake. But Jordan was persistent. He kept showing up at my presentations, asking intelligent questions, bringing coffee when I pulled all-nighters in the studio. I paused, remembering the version of Jordan who had once believed in my dreams as fiercely as I did. Our first real conversation lasted 6 hours. We met for coffee after one of my presentations, and suddenly it was midnight and the cafe was closing around us. He told me about his vision for using technology to solve urban problems, and I shared my passion for creating buildings that could heal communities instead of dividing them. He supported your ambitions then? Mary asked. More than supported them, he amplified them. When I got my first job at Morrison & Associates, he celebrated harder than I did. He would stay up late helping me prepare for client presentations, even though he barely understood the technical aspects of architecture. He bought me my first professional drafting table, said every architect needed a proper workspace. The memory made my chest tight. For our first anniversary, he gave me a leather portfolio with my initials embossed in gold. Inside was a card that said, "For the woman who's going to change the world, one building at a time." Mary reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What happened to that man? Success happened. About 3 years into our marriage, Jordan's startup was acquired by Tech Forward Solutions. Suddenly he was making 6 figures, moving in different circles, attending corporate events where the wives were expected to be beautiful, charming accessories, rather than career women with their own ambitions. I took a sip of wine, tasting the bitterness that had crept into even my sweetest memories. At first the changes were subtle. He started suggesting I might want to tone down my intensity at dinner parties, that clients might feel more comfortable working with male architects. When I won my first major contract, designing a community center in the Arts District, he actually asked if I was sure I could handle such a big project while maintaining our home life properly. He was threatened by your success, Mary's husband observed. I think so, though he would never have admitted it. The Jordan I fell in love with was confident enough to celebrate my achievements, but as he climbed the corporate ladder, he started adopting this more traditional view of marriage. He began talking about how important it was for successful men to have wives who could support their image, who understood that a man's career has to come first in a partnership. I laughed bitterly, remembering the countless arguments we'd had about my attitude problem and selfish ambitions. The breaking point came 4 years ago. I'd been offered a partnership at Morrison and Associates, the youngest person in the firm's history to be considered. It was everything I'd worked for since graduation, but Jordan convinced me to turn it down. Mary's expression hardened. He what? He said it wouldn't be fair to our future family for both of us to have demanding careers. He painted this picture of us trying to balance 2 high-pressure jobs, never seeing each other, never having time for children. He made it sound like choosing his career over mine was the mature, responsible decision. The shame I'd carried for years rose in my throat. I believed him. I was so in love, so committed to making our marriage work, that I turned down the partnership and took a consulting position instead. I told myself it was temporary, that once Jordan was more established, once we'd started our family, I could return to a full-time career. But the family never came? Mary asked gently. Every time I brought up having children, Jordan had another reason to wait. First, he needed to establish himself at Tech Forward. Then he was up for a promotion. Then he wanted to buy a bigger house. Then he needed to build his portfolio for the next level. I stared at Jordan's empty chair, remembering all the conversations where he'd pushed our future just a little further out of reach. I realize now that he never intended to start a family with me. He wanted the image of a devoted wife without the reality of shared responsibilities. So you started your own firm, Mary's husband said, as a way to reclaim your career. Initially, it was just a way to stay connected to architecture while Jordan figured out what he wanted from life. I took small projects, worked under my maiden name to avoid any conflict of interest with his corporate world. But as my client base grew, as I started winning awards and recognition, I realized something important. I was a better architect on my own than I'd ever been as part of someone else's firm. I spread out some of the documents on the table, photos of buildings I'd designed, magazine articles featuring my work, client testimonials praising my innovative approach to sustainable design. Martinez Sustainable Design became my secret life. While Jordan thought I was volunteering at museum galas, I was meeting with city planners. While he assumed I was shopping or having lunch with friends, I was overseeing construction projects and mentoring young architects. It must have been exhausting, Mary observed, maintaining such an elaborate deception. It was, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I was building something that was entirely mine, something Jordan couldn't diminish or control. Every successful project, every satisfied client, every industry award, they were proof that the woman Jordan fell in love with was still there, just buried under years of compromise and self-doubt. I looked at my reflection in the restaurant's windows again, seeing not just the polished corporate wife Jordan had tried to create, but the architect who had designed some of the city's most innovative buildings, while her husband remained completely oblivious. The irony is that I became more successful keeping my career secret than I ever could have been with his support. While he was climbing his corporate ladder, I was building an empire, and tomorrow, when he tries to portray me as a dependent housewife in divorce court, he's going to discover just how wrong he's been about everything. Mary raised her glass, to the woman who never stopped building, even when the world told her to tear herself down. As we toasted, I felt the last vestiges of the old Lauren, the woman who had diminished herself for love, finally dissolving. What remained was purely authentically me. The changes didn't happen overnight, I continued, settling deeper into my chair, as Mary and her husband listened with rapt attention. If Jordan had suddenly transformed from my biggest supporter into my harshest critic, I would have recognized the red flags immediately. But he was too smart for that. The erosion was so gradual, so subtle, that I convinced myself I was imagining things. I traced the rim of my wine glass with my finger, remembering the confusion of those early years when love began curdling into something toxic. It started with little comments disguised as concern. When I'd get excited about a new project, Jordan would say things like, "Just make sure you're not overcommitting yourself, babe. You know how stressed you get when you take on too much." At first I thought he was being protective. Mary frowned. But he was actually undermining your confidence. Exactly. And because it came from a place of supposed love, I internalized it. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I really was too emotional, too intense, too much for the corporate world to handle. The memory of those early doubts still stung. Jordan had a particular talent for making his criticisms sound like observations. I noticed the Hendersons seemed a bit overwhelmed when you were explaining your design concept at dinner last night. Maybe tone it down a bit next time. The insidiousness of it amazed me even now. How had I not seen what he was doing? He began suggesting changes to my appearance. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments that would make me more approachable to his colleagues. Softer makeup, more conservative clothing, fewer bold jewelry pieces. He said it with such concern for my professional image that I actually thanked him for the advice. Mary's husband shook his head. Classic manipulation, making you feel grateful for the criticism. The social events were the worst, I continued. Jordan would coach me before every corporate dinner or networking event. Remember, these people are conservative, he'd say. Let's not overwhelm them with too much talk about your work. Focus on being charming and supportive. When I'd try to participate in conversations about urban development or architectural trends, topics I was literally an expert on, he'd interrupt with comments like, "Lauren's being modest. She dabbles in design, but she's really more focused on our home life." The humiliation of those moments came flooding back. Standing in rooms full of people discussing my field of expertise, while being relegated to smiling and nodding like an ornament, I started dreading social events that I'd once enjoyed. I felt like I was performing a role, the perfect corporate wife, instead of being myself. How did you rationalize it at the time? Mary asked. I told myself that marriage required compromise, that supporting Jordan's career was an investment in our joint future. He was so convincing when he talked about how successful couples operated as a team, with clearly defined roles that played to each person's strengths. I laughed bitterly. Apparently, my strength was looking beautiful and keeping quiet. The erosion had accelerated after Jordan's promotion to senior vice president. Suddenly, he was traveling more, attending higher-level meetings, moving in circles where the expectations for wives were even more rigid. He started bringing home stories about his boss's wife, Amelie, who had given up her law career to focus on entertaining and charity work. Jordan would talk about how elegant she was, how perfectly she complemented her husband's image, how smart she was to recognize that her role was to enhance his success rather than compete with it. He was comparing you to her, Mary observed, constantly, and not favorably. When I'd mention wanting to pursue larger architectural projects, Jordan would sigh and say something like, "Amelie understands that Robert needs a wife who can focus entirely on supporting his career. She doesn't distract him with her own professional ambitions." The implication was clear: my ambitions were a distraction, a burden, a sign that I didn't truly understand what it meant to be a good wife. The memories piled up like architectural drawings scattered across a desk, each one showing a different angle of the same systematic demolition of my self-worth. He started monitoring my time more closely, asking detailed questions about how I'd spent my day. If I'd been working on a consulting project, he'd express disappointment that I hadn't been able to handle certain household tasks. "I just thought, since you're home most of the day anyway, you'd have time to coordinate the cleaning service and handle the grocery shopping." He was reframing your work as a hobby, Mary's husband said, his voice tight with anger on my behalf. Exactly. And because I was only taking small consulting projects, partly due to his constant undermining, it was easy for him to dismiss my work as insignificant. When I won a local design award for a small residential project, his response was, "That's nice, honey, but don't let it go to your head. It's not like you're competing with real architectural firms." The casual cruelty of that comment still took my breath away. That was the moment I knew I had to start building something he couldn't touch, couldn't diminish, couldn't take credit for or explain away. I realized that if I was going to survive this marriage with any sense of self intact, I needed to create a professional identity that existed completely separate from Jordan's influence. "So you started Martinez Sustainable Design," Mary said. "In secret, yes. I used my savings from before our marriage as startup capital. I rented a small office space across town under my maiden name. I created a separate business bank account, got a different phone line, even had business cards printed without Jordan's knowledge. The freedom of those early days came flooding back, the exhilaration of making decisions without having to justify them, of pursuing projects based on my own vision, rather than someone else's approval. But the deception must have been exhausting, Mary's husband observed. It was. I had to create elaborate cover stories for my absences. Client meetings became lunch dates with college friends. Site visits became shopping trips or spa appointments. I lived in constant fear that Jordan would discover the truth before I was ready to reveal it. I paused, remembering the weight of carrying such a significant secret. But it was also the only thing that kept me sane. Every successful project, every satisfied client, every industry recognition, they were proof that I hadn't imagined my abilities, that Jordan's constant criticism was wrong. The restaurant around us had grown quieter as the evening progressed, other diners finishing their meals and departing, but Mary and her husband remained riveted, understanding that they were witnessing more than just the end of a marriage. They were seeing the emergence of a woman who had spent years buried under someone else's expectations. The strangest part was that as my secret business grew more successful, Jordan became more convinced that I was incompetent. He'd make jokes at dinner parties about my little design hobby, completely unaware that I was earning more than he was. I smiled grimly. Last month he actually suggested I might want to take some basic business classes to better understand how successful companies operate. Mary gasped. While you were running a multi-million-dollar firm. While I was running a multi-million-dollar firm that had just won 3 international design awards, I raised my glass again, feeling the last traces of shame dissolving into something much more powerful. That's when I knew it was time to stop hiding. Building Martinez Sustainable Design while married to Jordan was like constructing a skyscraper during an earthquake. I told Mary, pulling out my phone to show her photos of my projects. Every foundation I laid had to be hidden, every success carefully concealed, every achievement downplayed or attributed to luck rather than skill. The first image on my screen showed a sleek modern building with living walls and solar panels integrated seamlessly into its design. This was my first major breakthrough, the Riverside Community Center. I landed the contract 8 months after starting my firm, competing against established architectural giants including Morrison and Associates, my former employer. Mary studied the photo with professional interest. It's beautiful. How did you manage such a complex project without Jordan noticing? Carefully orchestrated deception, I admitted. The project required site visits 3 times a week for 6 months. I told Jordan I'd joined a women's professional development group that met regularly downtown. He was actually proud of me for finally finding appropriate activities to fill my time. I swiped to the next image, a series of sustainable townhouses with innovative water reclamation systems. While Jordan thought I was attending networking lunches with other corporate wives, I was meeting with city planners, environmental engineers and construction supervisors. While he assumed I was shopping for home decor, I was selecting eco-friendly building materials and negotiating with contractors. The irony still amazed me. Jordan would come home and complain about the traffic downtown, never realizing that half the construction delays he encountered were from my projects. He'd rant about amateur architects disrupting his commute while looking at buildings I'd designed. Mary's husband leaned forward to examine the photos. How did you handle the business finances without him discovering the accounts? I kept everything completely separate. Different bank, different accountant, different lawyer. I used my maiden name professionally and maintained my original credit profile from before our marriage. As far as the financial world was concerned, Lauren Martinez and Lauren Hayes were 2 different people. I pulled up my banking app, showing them account balances that would have shocked Jordan. I even filed separate tax returns for my business income, claiming it under my maiden name with my original Social Security documentation. The technical aspects of maintaining my double life had been almost as complex as running the business itself. I had 2 different professional wardrobes. My Lauren Hayes clothes were the conservative understated outfits Jordan preferred, neutral colors, minimal jewelry, nothing that would draw attention away from him. My Lauren Martinez wardrobe was bold, confident, creative, the kind of clothing that commanded respect in boardrooms and inspired confidence in clients. Where did you keep everything? Mary asked. I rented a small apartment across town, ostensibly as a creative studio space. I told Jordan it was where I worked on my design hobbies when I needed quiet time away from home distractions. He actually encouraged it, saying it was good for me to have my own space for crafts and projects. The condescension in his voice had been unmistakable, but it had also provided perfect cover for my real activities. I showed them more photos, award ceremonies where I'd accepted recognition for innovative design, industry conferences where I'd delivered keynote speeches, magazine covers featuring my work. This is me receiving the Regional Sustainability Award last year. Jordan was at a corporate retreat that weekend, so he never knew it happened. This is the cover of Architectural Digest, featuring my waterfront development project. The magazine came to our house, but I intercepted it before Jordan could see it. The complexity of maintaining such elaborate secrecy had required military-level planning. I had separate email accounts, different phone numbers for business calls, even a P.O. box for professional correspondence. My assistant, a brilliant woman named Amelie, who managed my schedule, became an expert at creating alibis for my absences. Amelie? Mary's eyebrows rose. Interesting choice of name. I smiled grimly. I named my business after my grandmother's maiden name, Martinez, and hired an assistant with the same name as Jordan's boss's wife. It felt like poetic justice, while Jordan was holding up the original Amelie as the perfect example of supportive wifehood. My Amelie was helping me build an empire. The restaurant had grown even quieter around us, but I was lost in memories of those exhilarating years when every day brought new challenges and victories that I couldn't share with the person closest to me. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, it was the emotional isolation. When I won my first major design award, I celebrated alone in my secret apartment with a bottle of champagne and tears of joy mixed with sadness that I couldn't share the moment with my husband. "Why didn't you just leave him then?" Mary's husband asked gently. "Once you realized you could be successful on your own." Because I kept believing he'd change. Every few months, Jordan would show glimpses of the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd been proud of my ambitions, instead of threatened by them. He'd make some small gesture of support, or express interest in my design work, and I'd convince myself that we could find our way back to each other. I paused, remembering how desperately I'd clung to those moments, and honestly, part of me enjoyed the secret. There was something deeply satisfying about being underestimated while simultaneously outperforming everyone's expectations. I scrolled through more images on my phone, construction sites, client meetings, team celebrations. Martina's sustainable design grew beyond my wildest dreams. We went from 3 employees in year 1 to 47 full-time staff by year 5. Our annual revenue exceeded Jordan's salary by the end of year 2, and by year 4, we were earning more than his entire department combined. He truly had no idea, Mary asked incredulously. None whatsoever. When I'd come home energized after closing a major deal or solving a complex design challenge, Jordan would assume I was excited about some trivial social event or shopping success. When I'd mention being tired after long days, he'd suggest I might want to cut back on my volunteer commitments so I could focus more energy on supporting his career. The photos on my phone told the story of a thriving business empire, innovative buildings rising from empty lots, satisfied clients shaking hands at project completions, my team accepting industry awards on behalf of Martina's sustainable design. Each image represented not just professional success, but a secret life where I was valued, respected, and allowed to be fully myself. Last month, we signed our biggest contract ever, a mixed-use development that will house over 3,000 families while maintaining net zero environmental impact. The project fee alone is more than Jordan will earn in the next 5 years. I smiled, thinking about the irony of timing. While he was planning to leave me for a woman he considered more worthy of success, I was quietly becoming one of the most influential architects on the East Coast. Mary raised her glass again. To the woman who built an empire while the world slept. As we toasted, I felt the weight of years of secrecy finally lifting from my shoulders. Soon, very soon, Lauren Martinez would step out of the shadows and take her rightful place in the light. The signs were there for months before tonight, I admitted to Mary, swirling the wine in my glass as I recalled the subtle shifts that had preceded Jordan's dramatic exit. I was just too invested in believing our marriage could be saved to see them clearly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a text message thread from 3 months earlier. Look at this. Jordan started asking increasingly specific questions about my daily schedule. He'd text me things like, "Hey babe, how was your book club meeting? What did you discuss?" When I'd give general answers, he'd press for details: which books we were reading, who else attended, what the other women thought about various topics. Mary examined the messages, her expression growing more concerned with each exchange. "He was testing your stories." Exactly. And I was so focused on maintaining my cover that I didn't realize he was gathering intelligence. I created elaborate fictional book discussions, invented personalities for imaginary book club members, even researched bestsellers, so I could speak knowledgeably about plots I'd never actually read. The amount of mental energy I'd expended on maintaining these lies suddenly seemed exhausting in retrospect. "What else changed?" Mary's husband asked. His travel schedule became erratic. Jordan had always been a creature of habit: predictable business trips, regular conference schedules, consistent late nights at the office. But starting around Christmas, his patterns became chaotic. Weekend trips that materialized at the last minute, week-long conferences in cities that didn't make sense for his industry, evening meetings that ran until midnight, with no clear explanation of what required such extended hours. I showed them another series of text messages where Jordan's explanations had become increasingly elaborate and contradictory. He told me he was attending a cybersecurity conference in Chicago, but when I mentioned it to his colleague Adam at a company party, Adam looked confused and said there hadn't been any major conferences that month. When I asked Jordan about the discrepancy, he claimed it was a private invitation-only event that wasn't widely publicized. The lies had piled up like unstable architectural supports, each one requiring additional deception to maintain the illusion. Then there were the credit card statements. Jordan had always been meticulous about our finances, reviewing every expense and questioning purchases that seemed unusual. But suddenly, he became secretive about the monthly statements, claiming he was handling them digitally to streamline our bookkeeping. Mary frowned. "You didn't have access to your own financial records." I had access to our joint checking account and my personal credit card, but Jordan managed our primary accounts and investments. He convinced me it was more efficient for one person to handle the complex financial planning, and since he worked in tech and understood digital banking systems better, it made sense for him to take the lead. The naivety of that arrangement now seemed breathtaking. What I didn't realize was that he'd opened several new accounts I knew nothing about. I pulled up a document on my phone, the private investigator's financial report that had revealed the scope of Jordan's deception. This shows charges for jewelry I never received, restaurant bills for dinners I never attended, hotel reservations for trips I was never invited on. He was living an entirely separate life while I was busy building my secret career. The timeline of Jordan's betrayal ran parallel to my business success in a way that couldn't have been coincidental. The more successful Martina's sustainable design became, the more distant Jordan grew. At first I attributed his behavior to stress from his promotion, or normal relationship evolution after 8 years of marriage. I actually blamed myself for being too focused on my work to notice his emotional needs. "He was projecting," Mary observed, "accusing you of the very behavior he was engaging in." Constantly, Jordan started making comments about how I seemed distracted lately and less present in our relationship. He'd suggest that my hobby projects were taking up too much mental space, that I needed to refocus on our marriage if I wanted it to survive. Meanwhile, he was literally building a relationship with another woman. The gaslighting had been so subtle, so expertly executed, that I'd begun questioning my own perceptions. 3 weeks ago, Jordan suggested we attend couples counseling. He framed it as concern for our relationship, saying he felt like we'd grown apart and needed professional help to reconnect. I was actually hopeful. I thought it meant he wanted to work through our problems. I showed Mary the business card Jordan had given me for the therapist he'd researched. Dr. Rebecca Stone, specializing in marital reconciliation and communication. Jordan scheduled our first appointment for next Tuesday. He said he'd already spoken with her about our situation, and that she was confident she could help us find our way back to each other. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While Jordan was scheduling therapy sessions to save our marriage, he was simultaneously shopping for engagement rings for Colette. The receipt is dated the same day he made our counseling appointment. Mary's husband shook his head in disgust. He was covering all his bases. If the affair was discovered, he could point to the therapy sessions as evidence that he was trying to work on the marriage, or he was planning to use the sessions to build a case that I was the problem in our relationship. Create a paper trail showing that I was uncooperative, unreasonable, or unwilling to change. The manipulation was so systematic, so calculated, that it took my breath away even now. The same man who once celebrated my ambitions was preparing to use my independence against me in divorce proceedings. I pulled up another document, Jordan's Google search history, which my investigator had accessed through our shared cloud account. Look at these searches from the past month: how to prove wife is financially irresponsible, spousal support when wife has no career, divorce strategies for high-earning husbands. He wasn't just planning to leave me, he was strategizing how to minimize my settlement by portraying me as a dependent housewife. The searches revealed the depth of Jordan's deception. He'd researched everything from hidden asset protection to character assassination tactics for divorce proceedings. He actually Googled how to prove wife is mentally unstable in divorce court. That's when I realized this wasn't just about falling out of love, this was about winning at any cost. Mary reached across the table and squeezed my hand. How did you discover all of this? Last month, Jordan left his laptop open while he showered. I saw an email notification from someone named Kiss with the subject line, "Can't wait for our life together."
I almost didn't look. Part of me didn't want to know the truth, but I opened it and found months of correspondence with Colette, including detailed plans for their future together, and discussions about how to handle the Lauren situations with minimal financial impact. The email thread had contained everything: romantic declarations, vacation plans, even conversations about the apartment they were planning to share after Jordan's divorce was finalized. That's when I hired the private investigator. I realized I needed documentation of everything, if I was going to protect myself from whatever Jordan was planning. I looked around the elegant restaurant, where Jordan had chosen to deliver his devastating announcement, understanding now that even this location had been calculated. He brought me here tonight, because he thought it would be the perfect setting for his noble exit, surrounded by influential people who would witness his gracious departure from an apparently unappreciative wife. Mary smiled grimly. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush, none whatsoever. While Jordan was orchestrating what he thought would be the perfect ending to our marriage, I was preparing to reveal truths that would rewrite the entire narrative. I raised my glass one more time. He wanted a performance. I'm about to give him the show of his lifetime. The time had come. I checked my watch. 37 minutes since Jordan had walked out of Les Bernardin, leaving me to face what he assumed would be my public humiliation. The restaurant had settled into its evening rhythm, conversations flowing at neighboring tables, servers moving gracefully between courses. No one suspected that in the next few minutes everything would change. I stood slowly, smoothing my emerald dress, and gathering the documents spread across our table. Mary and her husband watched with anticipation, as I picked up my wine glass, the deep burgundy liquid catching the candlelight, like liquid fire. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the dining room. The conversations gradually died, as heads turned toward me, curiosity replacing the earlier sympathetic glances. "I'd like to make a toast." The restaurant fell silent except for the soft classical music playing in the background. Even the servers paused their movements, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on me, the abandoned wife who should have been crying into her champagne, not standing with quiet confidence addressing a room full of strangers. "Many of you witnessed my husband's departure tonight," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "Jordan Hayes made quite a dramatic exit, declaring that he couldn't continue living a lie. He painted himself as the noble party in our marriage, suggesting that I deserved better than what he was capable of giving." A murmur rippled through the dining room. Several diners who had been present during Jordan's announcement leaned forward, eager to hear what I had to say. The elderly couple at table 12 had their phones out, clearly recording what they sensed would be worth remembering. What Jordan doesn't know, what he's never known in our 8 years of marriage, is who I really am. I held up one of my business cards, the elegant black cardstock visible even from across the room. My name is Lauren Martinez, and I am the founder and principal architect of Martinez Sustainable Design. The silence that followed was absolute. Mary beamed at me encouragingly while her husband nodded with approval. Around the room I could see recognition dawning on several faces. People who had heard of my firm, who had seen our projects featured in architectural magazines, who understood the significance of what I'd just revealed. While my husband believed I spent my days arranging charity luncheons and attending book clubs, I was actually building one of the most successful sustainable architecture firms on the East Coast. I pulled out my phone and projected images onto the restaurant's display screen, which Mary had quietly arranged with the management. These are some of the buildings my team and I have designed over the past 6 years. The images flashed across the screen. The award-winning Riverside Community Center, the innovative waterfront development, the sustainable housing complex that had been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest. Gasps and murmurs of appreciation filled the dining room as people recognized buildings they'd seen, admired, or even worked in. The downtown development project that Jordan has been desperately trying to secure for his company. That contract was awarded to Martinez Sustainable Design 6 months ago. I smiled as I delivered this particular revelation. The building where Tech Forward Solutions leases their offices. I own it. The little design hobby Jordan loved to dismiss at dinner parties, it generates more revenue annually than his entire department combined. The reaction was immediate and electric. People were pulling out their phones, searching for Martinez Sustainable Design, looking at my work, confirming the truth of what I was saying. At table 7 I recognized 2 city council members who had worked with my firm on recent municipal projects. Their expressions showed both surprise and newfound respect. But perhaps the most interesting part of tonight's revelation, I continued, holding up a legal document, is that 3 weeks ago, I discovered Jordan has been having an affair with his assistant, Colette Morrison, for the past 14 months. While I was building my architectural empire in secret, he was building a relationship with another woman. The room erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. This was better than any entertainment Le Bernardin had ever provided. I could see servers discreetly recording on their phones, knowing this story would be shared across social media within minutes. Jordan planned to divorce me while claiming I was financially dependent on him, hoping to minimize any settlement by portraying me as a kept woman who had contributed nothing to our joint success. I laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the silent room. What he didn't realize is that while he was researching divorce strategies for high-earning husbands, I was documenting every aspect of his deception.
I held up the private investigator's report, thick with photographs and financial records. I have evidence of every lie, every secret dinner, every romantic getaway, every piece of jewelry he bought for his mistress, with money from accounts he thought I didn't know about. The energy in the room was palpable. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was a masterclass in hidden strength, in the power of being underestimated, in the sweet satisfaction of truth finally coming to light. Jordan Hayes walked out of this restaurant tonight, believing he was abandoning a helpless housewife who would be devastated by his departure. I raised my wine glass higher, my voice growing stronger with each word. Instead, he abandoned a multi-millionaire businesswoman who was already 3 steps ahead of his game. The applause started slowly. Mary and her husband were the first to clap, followed by the city council members who knew my work, then spreading throughout the dining room like wildfire. People were standing now, their appreciation for my revelation mixing with admiration for the strategic brilliance of my long-hidden success. So here's to living authentically, I declared, my voice rising above the applause. To building empires in secret, when the world tries to diminish your dreams. To the power of being underestimated by people who should have known better, and to the sweet satisfaction of proving that sometimes, the best revenge is simply revealing who you've always been. I drained my wine glass as the room erupted in cheers and applause. People were approaching our table, wanting to shake my hand, to congratulate me, to hear more about my journey. Business cards were being exchanged, new connections forming, opportunities emerging from what Jordan had intended to be my moment of greatest humiliation. My phone buzzed with notifications. The video of my toast was already going viral on social media platforms. #Lauren Martinez was trending. My business website was crashing from increased traffic. Interview requests were pouring in from journalists who wanted to tell the story of the architect who built an empire, while her husband remained completely oblivious. As I stood surrounded by admirers and supporters, I realized that Jordan's dramatic exit had given me something precious, the perfect opportunity to step out of the shadows and claim my rightful place in the light. The woman he had tried to diminish had just announced herself to the world, and there was no going back. The applause was still echoing through Le Bernardin when my phone began buzzing incessantly. Text messages, missed calls, social media notifications, the digital avalanche had begun. I glanced at the screen to see Jordan's name appearing repeatedly among the chaos of incoming communications, his desperation evident even through the tiny notification previews. "Lauren, that was magnificent," Mary said, embracing me warmly as the crowd around our table gradually dispersed back to their own dinners. "I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that." Her husband was beaming as he shook my hand. "You've just rewritten the playbook for how to handle public humiliation. Instead of being the victim of Jordan's theatrics, you've become the hero of your own story." I felt a strange combination of euphoria and exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried me through the toast was beginning to fade, replaced by the overwhelming reality of what I'd just done. There was no taking it back now. Lauren Martinez was officially public, my double life exposed, my secret empire revealed to anyone with an internet connection. Miss Martinez, a young woman approached our table hesitantly, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm a junior architect at Foster & Partners. I've been following your work for months through industry publications. I had no idea you were, I never connected Lauren Martinez with," she gestured around the restaurant. "This is incredible, you're incredible." More people were gathering, architects who recognized my work, business owners who had heard of my firm, even some of Jordan's former colleagues who were putting the pieces together with expressions of shock and newfound respect. The irony wasn't lost on me that in one evening, I'd gained more authentic professional recognition than I'd received in 8 years of marriage. My phone rang, and I saw my assistant Amelie's name on the screen. "I have to take this," I told Mary, stepping toward the restaurant's quieter alcove near the wine cellar. "Lauren," Amelie's voice was electric with excitement. "I've been watching the social media explosion from home. The firm's website has crashed twice in the past hour from traffic overload. We've received 47 interview requests, including calls from Architectural Digest, Forbes, and 3 major news networks. The story is trending on every platform." I leaned against the wine cellar wall, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. "How bad is the Jordan situation?" "He's been calling the office non-stop for the past 20 minutes. I haven't answered, but his voicemails are intense. He's demanding to speak with you immediately, threatening legal action if you don't call him back, claiming you've violated his privacy by sharing confidential marital information publicly." Amelie paused. "He sounds panicked." The sweetness of that panic was almost overwhelming. For 8 years, Jordan had controlled every narrative, shaped every story to his advantage, managed every social situation to maintain his image of success and superiority. Now, for the first time, he was on the defensive, scrambling to contain damage he couldn't control. "Have you heard from Tech Forward?" I asked, curious about how Jordan's employer was handling the revelation that their senior vice president's wife was actually their building's landlord, and a major competitor in the tech infrastructure space. Roman Patterson from Tech Forward's executive team called personally. "He wants to meet with you tomorrow to discuss potential collaboration opportunities." Apparently they've been trying to partner with Martinez Sustainable Design for months, never realizing the connection. Amelie's amusement was audible. He seemed genuinely impressed by what he called your strategic discretion in maintaining professional boundaries. I laughed despite myself. Jordan's company wanted to work with the wife he'd been systematically undermining for years.
The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Sheep dead. Any to is do see. Sheep dead. Sheep dead. Sheep dead.
Trob's mentor, Professor Williams, called from the architecture program. She wants to invite you to speak at the spring symposium about innovation and sustainable design. 3 different women's business organizations have requested interviews about maintaining work-life balance in demanding careers. Amelie paused, meaningfully, and Colette Morrison submitted her resignation from Tech Forward this afternoon, effective immediately. That last piece of information hit differently than the rest. Colette's sudden departure suggested that Jordan's carefully constructed plan was already falling apart. Perhaps she'd realized that being the other woman in a public scandal wasn't the glamorous future she'd imagined. There's something else, Amelie continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. I've been monitoring Jordan's social media accounts, and he's posting frantically. He's trying to control the narrative by claiming you've had some kind of breakdown, that the stress of maintaining an unrealistic business venture finally got to you. He's suggesting that tonight's revelation was a desperate cry for attention from a wife who felt neglected. The predictability of Jordan's response was almost disappointing. Of course he would try to reframe my success as instability, my strategic revelation as emotional manipulation. It was the same pattern he'd used throughout our marriage, dismissing my achievements by questioning my mental state. Forward everything to my lawyer, I said. Let her handle the legal threats. Accept the interview requests from reputable sources. And Amelie, thank you for everything. I couldn't have built this without your support. When I returned to the main dining room, Mary and her husband were deep in conversation with 2 men I recognized, city planning commissioners who had worked with my firm on several municipal projects. The networking opportunities were flowing naturally from my revelation, professional connections forming organically, as people realized they were in the presence of the architect behind buildings they'd admired. Lauren, one of the commissioners said, standing to greet me, we had no idea you were married to Jordan Hayes. We've been working with Martinez Sustainable Design for 2 years, and you never mentioned the connection. Professional boundaries, I replied diplomatically. I've always believed in keeping my business relationships separate from my personal life. The second commissioner nodded approvingly. Smart approach, the work speaks for itself, which is exactly what happened tonight. You let your achievements do the talking. As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by supporters, allies, and potential collaborators. These weren't people who knew me as Jordan's wife, or were impressed by my connection to his success. They respected Lauren Martinez, the architect, the businesswoman, the innovator, who had quietly revolutionized sustainable design, while flying under the radar of traditional industry networks. My phone buzzed again, a text from my best friend from college who had seen the viral video. GRL. I am living for this. Jordan never deserved you. Call me tomorrow so I can properly celebrate your iconic moment. The support was pouring in from every direction, friends, colleagues, even strangers who were inspired by the story of a woman who had built an empire, while being systematically underestimated. The narrative Jordan had tried to create about tonight had been completely subverted. Instead of witnessing the public humiliation of an abandoned housewife, the world had just met Lauren Martinez, architect, entrepreneur, and master strategist, who had turned her husband's betrayal into the greatest professional revelation of her career. As I gathered my documents and prepared to leave Le Bernardin, I realized this wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of everything I'd been building toward for years. By the time I arrived at my secret apartment, the space Jordan had dismissively referred to as my craft studio, it was nearly midnight. The elegant downtown loft that had served as my professional headquarters for 6 years had never felt more like home than it did in this moment. While Jordan was probably pacing our marital bedroom, frantically trying to process what had just happened, I was finally able to exist fully as myself in a space he'd never contaminated with his presence. The apartment reflected the real Lauren Martinez in ways our shared home never had. Clean lines and natural materials dominated the open floor plan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city skyline, including several buildings that bore my architectural signature. The walls displayed awards and recognition that Jordan had never seen, photographs from job sites he'd never visited, documentation of a professional life he'd never acknowledged. I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, a vintage Bordeaux from the year I'd landed my first major contract. Tonight certainly qualified as worthy of celebration. As I settled into my favorite chair, a mid-century modern piece I'd selected for its perfect balance of comfort and sophistication, my phone continued its relentless buzzing. The notifications were overwhelming. Lauren Martinez was trending globally now, with thousands of people sharing the video of my toast, adding their own commentary about hidden talents, underestimated women, and the sweet satisfaction of public vindication. Architecture blogs were republishing my portfolio, with headlines like "The Secret Genius Behind the City's Most Innovative Buildings," and how Lauren Martinez built an empire while her husband watched Netflix. I scrolled through the responses, finding unexpected comfort in the support of strangers who saw themselves reflected in my story. Women shared their own experiences of being dismissed by partners, of hiding their achievements to preserve fragile masculine egos, of building careers in the shadows because direct success was somehow threatening to the men who claimed to love them. But mixed among the celebration were Jordan's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages. The progression from confusion to anger to panic was clearly visible in his communication. "Lauren, what the hell was that? Call me immediately." "I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish with this stunt. People are calling me asking about your business. This has gone too far. You're making both of us look foolish. This needs to stop now. Please just call me back. We can work through this if you stop the dramatics. Lauren, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Are you having some kind of breakdown?" The evolution was predictable. Jordan's inability to comprehend that I possessed capabilities beyond his recognition, his immediate assumption that my success must be fabricated or exaggerated, his retreat into concern trolling when faced with evidence he couldn't dismiss. I turned off my phone and ran a bath in the oversized soaking tub I'd installed during the apartment's renovation. The warm water and lavender bath salts helped wash away the residual tension from the evening's confrontation. For the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed, completely myself, completely free from the constant vigilance required to maintain my double life. The silence was profound. No Jordan coming home late with elaborate excuses. No need to quickly close my laptop when he entered the room. No carefully constructed stories about book clubs and charity events. Just me, my achievements, and the city lights twinkling beyond my windows like terrestrial stars bearing witness to my liberation. I wrapped myself in a cashmere robe, another luxury purchase Jordan had never seen, and opened my laptop to review the day's business communications. Despite the personal drama, Martinez Sustainable Design had received 12 new project inquiries since my public revelation. The exposure from tonight's events was generating exactly the kind of high-profile attention I'd been working toward for years. An email from the mayor's office caught my attention. The subject line read, "Urgent, Downtown Revitalization Partnership Opportunity." The message indicated that the mayor wanted to discuss an exclusive contract for redesigning the entire financial district with sustainable infrastructure. A project worth potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, and representing the kind of legacy-defining work that could cement my firm's position as a national leader in green urban development. The irony was exquisite. While Jordan had spent the evening trying to diminish me publicly, my professional stock had reached an all-time high. His attempt to control the narrative of our relationship's end had instead launched my career into a stratosphere he couldn't have imagined. I opened a bottle of champagne, a vintage Dom Perignon I'd been saving for when Martinez Sustainable Design reached its 5th anniversary, and toasted my reflection in the apartment's windows. Tomorrow would bring legal complications, media interviews, and the complex process of disentangling 8 years of shared finances and property. But tonight was for celebrating the death of Lauren Hayes and the resurrection of Lauren Martinez. I pulled out a leather journal I'd started keeping 6 years earlier, documenting my journey from hidden architect to industry leader. The entries chronicled every challenge overcome, every project completed, every moment of doubt conquered through sheer determination. Tonight deserved its own entry, October 15th, the day I stopped hiding. After 8 years of living in Jordan's shadow, I finally stepped into the light. The world now knows what I've always known, that I am capable of extraordinary things when given the space to flourish. Jordan thought he was abandoning a dependent housewife. Instead, he set free an architect who will reshape this city's skyline and redefine what sustainable urban development can achieve. The marriage is over, but my real life is just beginning. I closed the journal and moved to my drafting table, where preliminary sketches for next month's projects awaited my attention. Working late into the night, I lost myself in the meditative process of translating vision into technical reality, of solving complex spatial puzzles, of creating beauty that would outlast any personal relationship. As dawn broke over the city, painting my apartment in golden light, I realized that Jordan's betrayal had given me something precious, complete freedom to be authentically myself without compromise, apology, or explanation. The woman who had built an architectural empire in secret was finally ready to claim her place in the world. The retreat was over. Tomorrow Lauren Martinez would face the world fully revealed, and she was ready for whatever came next. The morning light streaming through my apartment windows carried a different quality than I'd ever noticed before, clearer, brighter, unfiltered by the fog of deception that had clouded my life for 8 years. I'd slept deeply for the first time in months, my dreams filled not with anxiety about maintaining my double life, but with visions of glass towers and sustainable communities rising from architectural blueprints. My phone had been silent since I'd turned it off the previous evening, but I knew that reactivating it would unleash a digital storm that had been building overnight. Before facing that chaos, I wanted to establish my strategy, to approach this new reality with the same methodical planning that had built Martinez's sustainable design, from a one-woman operation into an industry powerhouse. I made coffee using the professional-grade espresso machine I'd installed in my apartment's kitchen, another luxury that Jordan had never known existed, and spread the morning newspapers across my dining table. The story had made front-page news in the business section of every major publication. "Secret Architect Reveals Empire Built in Marriage's Shadow," read the headline in the Financial Tribune. The accompanying photograph showed me mid-toast at Le Bernardin, wine glass raised, confidence radiating from every line of my body. The coverage was universally positive, framing my revelation as an inspiring story of hidden female achievement, rather than a scandalous marital breakdown. Editorial pieces praised my strategic discretion and professional integrity, noting how I'd maintained clear boundaries between my business success and my husband's career despite operating in overlapping industries. When I finally powered on my phone, the notifications cascade was even more intense than I'd anticipated. 743 missed calls, over 2,000 text messages, and enough social media mentions to crash most servers. But buried among the media requests and congratulatory messages were several communications that required immediate attention. The first was from my lawyer, Rebecca Stone, coincidentally, the same attorney Jordan had recommended for our couples counseling, though she'd clearly chosen to represent my interests instead. Her message was brief but urgent. "Jordan has retained Davidson and Associates. They're threatening to freeze your business assets pending investigation of marital property claims. We need to meet immediately." The second was from my accountant, confirming what I'd suspected. Jordan had attempted to access Martinez Sustainable Design's financial records overnight, presumably trying to build a case that marital funds had been used to support my business operations. His discovery that all accounts were completely separate, funded entirely through my premarital savings and business revenues, had apparently prompted increasingly frantic calls to financial institutions where he'd assumed he held authority. The third message came from an unexpected source, Roman Patterson, Jordan's direct supervisor at Tech Forward Solutions. "Miss Martinez, I believe there may be some urgent matters we should discuss regarding your husband's position with our company. Could we arrange a confidential meeting at your earliest convenience?" That particular communication intrigued me more than the others. Tech Forward's sudden desire for a private conversation suggested that Jordan's public meltdown had created complications beyond his personal life. The tech industry valued stability and professional discretion. Employees whose personal dramas became viral sensations rarely maintained their corporate standing for long. I dressed carefully for the day ahead, selecting a tailored charcoal suit that projected both authority and approachability. The clothing choices felt symbolic. After years of moderating my appearance to meet Jordan's preferences, I was finally dressing to reflect my own professional identity rather than his social expectations. My first stop was Rebecca Stone's law office, a sleek downtown space that radiated competence and success. Rebecca herself was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s with sharp eyes and an immediate air of strategic thinking. Jordan's attorneys are operating from a position of panic, she explained, spreading documents across her conference table. They're throwing every possible claim at the wall to see what sticks. Fraudulent concealment of assets, misuse of marital funds, even suggesting that your business success somehow constitutes marital infidelity. I laughed at the absurdity of that last claim. Marital infidelity through architecture. Apparently they're arguing that maintaining a secret professional life represents a fundamental breach of marital trust equivalent to adultery. Rebecca's expression showed what she thought of that legal strategy. It's desperate and unlikely to succeed, but it could complicate proceedings if we don't respond decisively. She opened a thick folder containing what appeared to be months of preparation. Fortunately, your documentation is impeccable. Every business transaction, every project contract, every revenue stream can be traced to sources completely independent of Jordan's income or assets. Your premarital savings account provided the initial startup capital, and the business has been entirely self-sustaining since month 3 of operations. The thoroughness of her preparation suggested she'd been anticipating this moment longer than I'd realized. How long have you been ready for this? Rebecca smiled grimly. Since the day Jordan recommended me for couples counseling. A man who researches divorce strategies while scheduling marriage therapy sessions isn't someone I'd trust to handle his relationship honestly. I started documenting everything the moment you became my client, even before you realized you'd need divorce representation. Her foresight was impressive, but it also highlighted how transparent Jordan's intentions had been to anyone paying attention. What's our next move? Aggressive counterattack. We file for divorce on grounds of adultery, seek full disclosure of Jordan's hidden assets, and most importantly we establish a protective order preventing him from interfering with your business operations. Rebecca's confidence was reassuring. Davidson and Associates specialize in intimidation tactics, but they're not prepared for a client whose wife turned out to be more successful than their husband. From Rebecca's office, I went directly to my real office, the Martinez Sustainable Design headquarters that Jordan had never seen. The building itself was one of my early projects, a converted warehouse transformed into a showcase of sustainable design principles. Solar panels and living walls covered the exterior, while the interior featured recycled materials and energy-efficient systems that had reduced operating costs by 60% compared to traditional office spaces. My staff greeted me with applause as I entered the main workspace. 47 employees who had built their careers alongside mine, who had believed in my vision when the rest of the world didn't know I existed. Their loyalty felt more valuable than any marriage certificate. Team meeting in 10 minutes, I announced, feeling the familiar rush of leading people who respected my expertise rather than questioning my right to have opinions. We need to discuss how last night's events affect our current projects and what opportunities we want to pursue going forward. As I looked around at the company I'd built, the awards covering our walls, the scale models of projects that would outlast any personal relationship, I realized that Jordan's betrayal had accomplished something he'd never intended. It had forced me to choose between hiding my light and letting it shine. For the first time in 8 years, Lauren Martinez was fully present in her own life, and she was magnificent. The Martinez Sustainable Design Office had transformed into something resembling a campaign headquarters, crossed with a media center. Phones rang constantly with interview requests, project inquiries, and congratulatory calls from industry leaders I'd admired for years, but never had the opportunity to meet face to face. My assistant Amelie had recruited 2 temporary staff members, just to handle the overwhelming volume of communications. "Lauren, you need to see this," called out Marcus Chen, my lead structural engineer, from his workstation near the conference room. He was projecting his computer screen onto the wall display, showing a live stream from Tech Forward Solutions emergency board meeting. They're discussing Jordan's employment status in real time. I joined the gathering crowd of employees who had paused their work to watch the corporate drama unfold. Through the building's glass conference room walls, we could see Tech Forward's executive team engaged in what appeared to be heated discussion. Roman Patterson, Jordan's supervisor, looked particularly animated as he gestured toward documents spread across the meeting table. "The audio's too low to hear specifics," Marcus explained, but according to the business news ticker, Tech Forward's stock price dropped 12% this morning after news broke that they'd been unknowingly competing against their own landlord's spouse for major contracts. The irony was delicious. Jordan's dramatic revelation had inadvertently exposed the conflict of interest that his company had been operating under for years, leasing office space from the wife of an employee who was actively competing for the same municipal contracts that Martinez Sustainable Design specialized in winning. My phone buzzed with a text from Roman Patterson. Board meeting concluded. Jordan's employment has been terminated effective immediately. We'd like to discuss partnership opportunities with Martinez Sustainable Design at your earliest convenience. Also, we're prepared to offer character references for divorce proceedings. The speed of Jordan's professional downfall was breathtaking. Less than 24 hours after walking out of Le Bernardin, convinced he was abandoning a helpless dependent, he was unemployed while his wife's business was fielding partnership offers from his former employer. "There's more," Amelie announced, hanging up from what appeared to have been an important call. That was Mayor Richardson's office. The City Council voted this morning to fast-track the Financial District Revitalization Project. They want Martinez Sustainable Design to lead the entire initiative, exclusive contract, unlimited budget, complete creative control. The office erupted in cheers and applause. The Financial District project represented everything we'd been working toward: the opportunity to redesign an entire urban area, according to sustainable principles, creating a model that other cities could replicate. It was the kind of legacy-defining work that architects dream about their entire careers. "The mayor wants to announce the partnership at a press conference tomorrow," Amelie continued. "Full media coverage, including architectural journals and national news networks. They're positioning it as a showcase of innovative female leadership in urban development." I felt a moment of dizziness as the magnitude of the opportunities suddenly became real. In less than 24 hours, my professional life had exploded from carefully guarded secret to the center of a national conversation about hidden female achievement and the power of authentic self-expression. The office door chimed, and I looked up to see 3 women entering, all professionally dressed, all carrying the confident bearing of people accustomed to being taken seriously in boardrooms. Amelie rose to greet them, checking her appointment calendar with obvious confusion. "Miss Martinez," the lead woman extended her hand with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Sarah Williams from the National Architecture Institute. These are my colleagues Dr. Jennifer Park from the Sustainable Design Council and Maria Santos from Women in Construction Leadership. We don't have an appointment, but we were hoping you might have a few minutes to discuss something quite exciting." I gestured toward our conference room, curious about what had brought 3 of the industry's most respected leaders to my office without prior arrangement. As we settled around the table, Dr. Williams opened a leather portfolio and withdrew what appeared to be official documentation. "Lauren, we've been following your work for years through industry publications and award submissions. Your innovative approach to sustainable urban development has consistently impressed our review committees." She paused, smiling. "What we didn't know until yesterday was the remarkable story behind your professional journey." Dr. Park leaned forward. "We're here to offer you something that's never been offered to an architect under 40. Immediate induction into the National Architecture Hall of Fame, recognition as a pioneer in sustainable design, and the opportunity to establish the Martinez Institute for Urban Innovation at the university of your choice." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the building's energy-efficient HVAC system. These honors typically took decades to achieve, representing the pinnacle of architectural recognition. They were offering me a level of professional validation that Jordan had spent years convincing me I'd never deserve. "There's more," Maria Santos added. "The International Council of Women Architects wants to feature your story as the centerpiece of next year's global conference. The theme is Hidden Excellence: Women Who Changed the World While No One Was Watching." Your journey from secret architect to industry leader perfectly embodies the challenges and triumphs that define our profession. Through the conference room windows, I could see my staff pretending to work while obviously listening to every word of the conversation. Their faces showed the same mixture of awe and pride that I was feeling, recognition that we had all been part of something extraordinary, even when the world hadn't been paying attention. "We know this is overwhelming, Dr. Williams continued, but we want you to understand that your revelation last night has created a moment of unprecedented opportunity. Young women in architecture programs across the country are sharing the video of your toast, seeing it as proof that they don't have to choose between professional excellence and personal relationships. They just have to choose partners who celebrate rather than diminish their ambitions." My phone buzzed with another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Martinez, this is Colette Morrison. I know you have no reason to trust anything I say, but I wanted you to know that watching your toast last night changed my perspective on everything. Jordan never described you as anything more than a housewife with some design hobbies. If I had known who you really were, what you had actually accomplished, I never would have believed his story about being trapped in an unfulfilling marriage. You deserved so much better than both of us." The message was unexpected, but it provided another piece of the puzzle that explained Jordan's deception. He hadn't just hidden my success from the world, he'd actively misrepresented my identity to justify his affair, painting me as the exact opposite of who I actually was. As the afternoon progressed, the office continued to buzz with activity that felt more like a celebration than a workday. Clients called to express their admiration for my journey, competitors reached out to discuss collaboration opportunities, and journalists requested interviews that would cement my transformation from hidden architect to public inspiration. The woman Jordan had tried to abandon was becoming the woman the world wanted to celebrate, and there was no going back. The euphoria of professional recognition was short-lived. By Thursday morning, Jordan had clearly realized that his initial strategy of portraying me as an unstable housewife wasn't working, and his legal team had pivoted to more aggressive tactics. I discovered this when Amelie burst into my office at 7:30 a.m., her usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious alarm. "Lauren, we have a problem," she said, spreading newspapers across my desk. Multiple problems, actually. The headlines were devastating. "Secret business built on husband's connections," questioned the Metropolitan Tribune. "Architecture firm under investigation for financial irregularities," declared the Business Journal. Most damaging was the feature article in Construction Weekly, "Industry Insiders Question Martinez Design's Rapid Rise." I scanned the articles quickly, recognizing Jordan's handiwork in every carefully planted insinuation. The stories suggested that my business success was somehow fraudulent, that I'd leveraged Jordan's professional connections to secure contracts, that Martinez Sustainable Design's financial records contained irregularities that warranted investigation. How did they get this published so quickly? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Davidson and Associates have connections throughout the business media," Amelie explained. "They've been making calls since Tuesday night, providing background information about your marriage, and suggesting that your business claims don't hold up to scrutiny. They're not making direct accusations, just raising questions that create doubt." The strategy was sophisticated and vicious. Rather than attacking me directly, Jordan's legal team was undermining my credibility by suggesting that my achievements were somehow tainted or exaggerated. They were banking on the business community's willingness to believe that a woman's rapid success must have some illegitimate explanation. My phone rang, displaying the number for City Hall. I answered to hear Mayor Richardson's chief of staff, her voice tight with concern. "Miss Martinez, we need to discuss the financial district project. Some concerns have been raised about your firm's background that require immediate clarification." My stomach dropped. The municipal contract that had seemed like a career-defining triumph was suddenly in jeopardy because of Jordan's scorched-earth legal strategy. What kind of concerns? Questions about potential conflicts of interest, the source of your startup funding, whether your husband's position at Tech Forward influenced any contract awards. Her tone was apologetic but firm. "We need comprehensive documentation proving that your business operations have been completely independent of any spousal connections." After hanging up, I called Rebecca Stone immediately. Her assistant put me through within seconds, suggesting she'd been expecting my call. "They're escalating," Rebecca confirmed without preamble. Jordan's team is systematically contacting your clients, your vendors, even your employees' previous employers. They're not making accusations, just asking questions designed to create doubt and uncertainty. The scope of the attack was breathtaking. Can they do that legally? Unfortunately, yes. As long as they're not making false statements, they can conduct due diligence investigations. The goal isn't to prove wrongdoing, it's to create enough uncertainty that people become nervous about being associated with you. Rebecca's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been working around the clock. We've also discovered that Jordan has hired a private relations firm to manage his public image. They're the ones coordinating the media campaign. I felt a familiar anger rising, the same fury that had sustained me through years of subtle undermining, but now amplified by the professional stakes involved. What's our counter strategy? Total transparency, Rebecca replied without hesitation. We're going to open every business record, every financial transaction, every contract negotiation to public scrutiny. We'll demonstrate not just that your success is legitimate, but that it's even more impressive than people realized. Within hours, my office had transformed into a war room. My accountant, my business lawyer, and 2 additional attorneys from Rebecca's firm worked with my staff to compile comprehensive documentation of every aspect of Martinez Sustainable Designs operations: bank records, contract negotiations, client communications, employee files, everything that could demonstrate the complete independence of my business from Jordan's career or connections. The counterattack began with a press release, distributed to every major media outlet. Martinez Sustainable Design voluntarily opens all records for public review. The accompanying documentation package was exhaustive, showing not just that my business was legitimate, but that it had succeeded despite operating in complete isolation from any potential advantages Jordan's position might have provided. The response was immediate and decisive. Construction Weekly, which had published the most damaging article questioning my firm's rapid rise, issued a retraction within 6 hours. The editor's note read, "After reviewing comprehensive financial and operational records provided by Martinez Sustainable Design, we find no evidence supporting questions about the firm's business practices. We regret any implication of impropriety and commend Ms. Martinez for her transparency in addressing these concerns." More importantly, several of my major clients issued public statements supporting my work. The Riverside Community Center Board published a detailed account of their selection process, emphasizing that Martinez Sustainable Design had won their contract through competitive bidding that focused entirely on design innovation and cost efficiency. 3 other municipal clients followed with similar testimonials, but Jordan's team wasn't finished. By Friday afternoon, Emily discovered that private investigators were questioning my employees about their work histories, trying to find evidence that my firm had somehow stolen clients or intellectual property from Jordan's company. They were also contacting my college professors, apparently hoping to find someone who might suggest my academic achievements had been similarly questionable. The harassment was becoming systematic and personal. When I arrived at my apartment building Friday evening, the doorman informed me that several people had been asking questions about my lease, my visitors, my daily routines. Jordan's team was clearly hoping to find some aspect of my life that could be twisted into supporting their narrative of deception. That's when I realized we needed to end this definitively. The defensive approach wasn't enough. Jordan's resources would allow him to continue attacking indefinitely, wearing down my clients' confidence and my employees' morale through sustained uncertainty. We needed to take the offensive. I called Rebecca at home, knowing she'd understand the urgency. "It's time to reveal everything," I said. "Jordan wants to play dirty. Let's show him what real power looks like." "What did you have in mind?" she asked, though I could hear the anticipation in her voice. "Total exposure. Every lie he's told, every asset he's hidden, every aspect of his affair documented and made public. He wanted to destroy my reputation through insinuation and doubt. We're going to destroy his through facts and evidence." The gloves were coming off, and Jordan Hayes was about to discover that he'd picked a fight with the wrong architect. The showdown came at 2:47 p.m. on a gray Saturday afternoon, in the most unlikely of places, the home improvement store where Jordan and I had once shopped for fixtures during happier times. I was selecting materials for a client's sustainable renovation project when I heard his voice behind me, tight with barely controlled desperation. "Lauren, The single word carried 8 years of history and 3 days of professional devastation. "We need to talk." I turned slowly, taking in his appearance with the detached observation I might apply to studying a building's structural flaws. Jordan looked haggard, his usually impeccable grooming replaced by stubble and wrinkled clothing. His eyes held the wild edge of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. "Do we?" I replied evenly, continuing to examine sustainable flooring samples. "Your lawyers have been communicating quite effectively through media leaks and harassment campaigns." Jordan stepped closer, his voice dropping to the persuasive tone that had once been able to convince me to doubt my own perceptions. "That's not me, Lauren. Davidson and Associates are handling things more aggressively than I wanted. I need you to understand that this has gotten out of control." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its execution. "Out of control?" I set down the bamboo sample I'd been examining and faced him directly. "Jordan, you hired a PR firm to destroy my reputation. You've had investigators questioning my employees and harassing my clients. You've planted stories suggesting my business success is somehow fraudulent. Which part of that sounds out of control rather than deliberately orchestrated?" His composure cracked slightly, revealing the panic underneath. "You destroyed my career, Lauren. Tech Forward fired me because of your little performance at Le Bernardin. Colette won't even take my calls. My professional reputation is ruined. What did you expect me to do?" The audacity was breathtaking. "I expected you to accept the consequences of your own choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to plan a divorce while researching how to minimize my settlement. You chose to publicly humiliate me at our anniversary dinner." I picked up another flooring sample, examining it with deliberate calm. I simply chose to respond with honesty instead of silence. Jordan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. "Lauren, please, can't we handle this privately? You've made your point. Everyone knows you're successful now. But continuing this war is going to hurt both of us." "There is no both of us anymore, Jordan. There hasn't been for 14 months since you started building a relationship with Colette, while lying to my face every single day." I moved to the next display, aware that other customers were beginning to notice our conversation but unwilling to be intimidated by his public manipulation tactics. He followed me, his voice taking on the wounded tone that had once made me feel guilty for questioning his behavior. "I made mistakes, yes, but you were living a lie too, Lauren. You had this whole secret life, this business empire you never told me about. How is that different from what I did?" The comparison was so fundamentally wrong that I laughed, a sound that echoed through the warehouse space and drew more curious glances. "The difference, Jordan, is that I built something while you destroyed something. I created jobs and designed buildings that will benefit communities for decades. You created chaos and hurt people who trusted you." "That's not fair," he protested, his volume rising enough to attract the attention of a store employee who began moving in our direction. "You made me look like a fool in front of everyone I know. My own boss thinks I'm incompetent because I didn't know my wife owned our building. Your boss thinks you're incompetent because you competed for contracts against a firm whose owner you lived with for 8 years without ever recognizing her capabilities." I selected 3 flooring samples and moved toward the checkout area, ready to end this encounter. "That's not my failure, Jordan. That's yours." He grabbed my arm, not roughly but firmly enough to stop my movement. The store employee quickened his pace toward us, clearly recognizing a domestic situation that might require intervention. "Lauren, I'm asking you to call off your lawyers, stop the media campaign. Let's settle this quietly and move on with our lives." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up to his face with an expression that made him immediately release his grip. "I don't have a media campaign, Jordan. I have facts. When your attorneys stop attacking my business and my reputation, my attorneys will stop defending them with evidence of your actual behavior. What do you want from me?" The question came out as almost a whisper, the fight draining out of him as he finally understood that I wouldn't be intimidated, manipulated, or convinced to retreat. "I want you to accept reality," I said simply. "I want you to stop pretending you're the victim in a situation you created. I want you to sign the divorce papers without trying to claim assets from a business you never knew existed. And most importantly, I want you to leave me alone so I can continue building the life I've worked for." Jordan stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally seeing the woman I'd always been underneath the version he'd tried to create. "You're not the person I married," he said finally. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "The person you married was someone who made herself smaller to accommodate your ego. The person you're divorcing is someone who builds skyscrapers and wins international design awards. I'm much better now." The store employee reached us, his name tag identifying him as a manager. "Excuse me, is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine," I told him with a genuine smile. This gentleman was just leaving. Jordan looked around at the other customers who were now openly watching our exchange, realizing that any further escalation would only create more public evidence of his behavior. "This isn't over, Lauren." "Yes, it is," I replied, with absolute certainty. 8 years ago, you married an architect who was just beginning to understand her potential. 3 days ago, you tried to destroy a woman who had spent those years building an empire. Tonight, you'll go home alone while I continue designing buildings that will outlast both of us. As Jordan walked away, his shoulders carrying the weight of complete defeat, I completed my purchase and headed back to my real life, the one where Lauren Martinez was exactly as powerful as she'd always known she could be. The manager approached me as I gathered my receipt. "I hope you don't mind my saying, ma'am, but that was one of the most impressive things I've ever witnessed." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Sometimes the best architecture happens when you finally remove the structures that were never supporting anything anyway. 6 months after the home improvement store confrontation, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office, watching construction crews break ground on the Financial District Revitalization Project. The view encompassed 12 city blocks that would be transformed according to Martinez Sustainable Design's vision, a living laboratory of green architecture that would serve as a model for urban development worldwide. The office itself was a testament to how dramatically my life had changed. Located on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, a building I'd designed 3 years earlier under my secret identity, the space reflected the full scope of my professional success without any need for concealment. Awards lined the walls, architectural models of completed projects occupied custom display cases, and signed photographs with mayors, environmental leaders, and fellow architects created a visual timeline of achievements Jordan had never known existed. "The Times reporter is here for your interview," Emily announced from the doorway, her role having evolved from executive assistant to chief of staff, as Martinez Sustainable Design expanded into a nationally recognized firm. "She's particularly interested in the mentorship program and the scholarship fund." The Lauren Martinez Foundation for Women in Architecture had launched 3 months earlier, funded by a percentage of profits from every project my firm completed. The foundation provided scholarships for women pursuing architectural degrees, mentorship programs connecting established female architects with emerging talent, and grants for sustainable design research at universities across the country. "Send her in," I said, straightening the jade blazer I'd chosen for today's media appearances. The color had become something of a signature for me, vibrant, confident, impossible to ignore. A far cry from the muted neutrals Jordan had preferred during our marriage. Sarah Chen from the New York Times entered with the kind of energy that indicated she was genuinely excited about the story she'd been assigned to cover. "Miss Martinez, thank you for making time in what I know is an incredibly busy schedule. Your transformation from hidden architect to national figure has been remarkable to follow." We settled into the conversation area of my office, where a scale model of the Financial District project dominated the coffee table. "The transformation wasn't really about me becoming something new," I explained, running my fingers along the miniature buildings that represented years of planning and vision. "It was about finally being able to exist publicly as who I'd always been privately." "Let's talk about the scope of what you've accomplished since your divorce was finalized," Sarah said, consulting her notes. "Martinez Sustainable Design has grown from 47 employees to over 200. You've opened offices in 3 additional cities. The firm's annual revenue has increased by 400%. How do you explain such rapid expansion?" I smiled, thinking about the irony of discussing my business growth with the same openness that had once seemed impossible. When you're no longer expending energy maintaining a false narrative about your capabilities, that energy becomes available for actual achievement. "The growth isn't really rapid, it's the natural result of removing artificial constraints. The conversation flowed easily as we discussed specific projects, design philosophy, and the challenges of scaling a business while maintaining quality standards. But the questions I found most meaningful were about the personal journey that had made professional success possible. Your story has resonated particularly strongly with women who feel they've been diminishing themselves in relationships, Sarah observed. The hashtag #HiddenArchitect has been used over 1 million times by women sharing their own experiences of concealing achievements to protect male egos. How does it feel to have inadvertently started a movement? The responsibility was something I'd been grappling with since my story went viral. I never intended to become a symbol of anything. I was just trying to reclaim my authentic identity after years of living a constrained version of myself. But if sharing my experience helps other women recognize their own worth and refuse to accept diminishment, then I'm honored to be part of that conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen, my lead engineer. Channel 7 news truck just pulled up. Ready for the groundbreaking ceremony coverage? The afternoon's events would mark another milestone in my post-divorce journey. The financial district groundbreaking wasn't just a construction project. It was a public celebration of sustainable design principles and a demonstration of what became possible when visionary architecture received proper support and recognition. There's something I'd like to show you before we head to the ceremony, I told Sarah, leading her to the conference room where my team had assembled a comprehensive display of current projects. This represents 18 months of work that happened while my marriage was ending and my identity was being reconstructed. The display was impressive even by industry standards, a mixed-use development in Seattle that would house 3,000 families while maintaining net zero environmental impact, a university campus in Denver that generated more energy than it consumed, a hospital complex in Miami designed to withstand Category 5 hurricanes while providing healing environments for patients and staff. Each of these projects was secured and developed during the period when my ex-husband was trying to convince divorce courts that I was financially dependent on him, I explained. While his lawyers were arguing that I deserved minimal spousal support because I'd never contributed to our joint success, I was signing contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Sarah's expression showed the kind of amazement that still surprised me, even after months of positive media coverage. The cognitive dissonance must have been extraordinary. How did you maintain focus on your work while dealing with such personal upheaval? The work saved me, I admitted. Every project, every design challenge, every client meeting was proof that I existed as more than Jordan's definition of who I should be. Architecture became my anchor to authentic identity when everything else felt uncertain. We moved to the windows overlooking the construction site, where media crews were setting up for the afternoon ceremony. Mayor Richardson would speak about urban sustainability, environmental leaders would discuss the project's global significance, and I would present the design vision that would transform this area of the city into a model for the future. One final question, Sarah said, preparing to close her notebook. If you could go back and change anything about how your story unfolded, would you? I considered the question while watching the construction crews prepare the site where my buildings would rise. I wouldn't change the outcome, but I wish I'd found the courage to be authentically myself years earlier. Not just for my sake, but for Jordan's. Living with a diminished version of someone isn't really living with them at all. We both deserved better than the relationship we'd created through mutual deception, his about his faithfulness, mine about my capabilities. As we prepared to leave for the groundbreaking ceremony, I realized that the woman standing in this office, successful, recognized, unapologetically brilliant, had always existed. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to build something worthy of her vision. That moment had finally arrived, and she was ready to reshape the world, one sustainable building at a time. 2 years after that devastating anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin, I stood at the podium in the United Nations headquarters, addressing the Global Climate Action Summit about sustainable urban development. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman Jordan had abandoned as a burden was now speaking to world leaders about reshaping the future of human habitation on Earth. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall, the buildings we design today will either accelerate climate change or become part of the solution. There is no neutral ground in architecture anymore. The audience of environmental ministers, urban planners and climate scientists listened intently as I presented the Martinez model, a comprehensive approach to sustainable city design that had been implemented in 12 cities across 4 continents. The Financial District project, that had seemed so significant 2 years ago, was now just one example in a portfolio of urban transformations that were redefining how humans could live in harmony with their environment. As I clicked through slides showing before and after images of transformed neighborhoods, I caught sight of Mary Whitfield in the audience. The restaurant owner who had witnessed my revelation at Le Bernardin had become an unlikely friend and supporter, implementing sustainable practices across her hospitality empire based on principles we discussed during our many subsequent conversations. After my presentation, Mary approached with her characteristic warm smile. "Lauren, that was magnificent. I remember the woman I met 2 years ago, sitting alone at an anniversary dinner with blood on her hand and fire in her eyes. Look at you now." The transformation had been complete but gradual. Martina's sustainable design now employed over 400 people across 6 offices. The Lauren Martinez Foundation had provided scholarships to over 300 women pursuing architecture degrees. I'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of the world's most influential environmental leaders, and my TED Talk about hidden potential had been viewed over 50 million times. "I received an interesting call yesterday," I told Mary as we walked through the UN lobby. "Jordan reached out through his new company's publicist. He wanted to arrange a meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities." Mary's eyebrows rose. "How did you respond?" "I didn't." I laughed. "My assistant Amelie handles all business inquiries through proper channels. If Jordan's architectural consulting firm wants to submit a proposal for subcontracting work, they can follow the same process as every other vendor." The irony was exquisite. Jordan had rebuilt his career after the Tech Forward debacle, launching a small firm that specialized in smart building technology integration. His company was competent but unremarkable, exactly the kind of mid-tier operation that occasionally received subcontracts from major firms like Martina's Sustainable Design. "Any regrets?" Mary asked as we exited onto First Avenue where my driver was waiting. I considered the question while watching the late afternoon sunlight reflect off the glass towers that formed Manhattan's skyline, several of which now bore my architectural signature. Only that it took me so long to trust my own worth. I spent 8 years trying to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of what I should be. Imagine what I could have accomplished if I'd started building openly from the beginning. The car ride to my final appointment of the day took us through the Financial District, where the Sustainable Urban Development Project was nearing completion. The transformed area had become a pilgrimage site for architects and urban planners from around the world, a living demonstration that environmental responsibility and economic prosperity weren't competing interests but complementary goals. My destination was the Columbia University School of Architecture, where I'd been invited to deliver the keynote address for this year's graduation ceremony. The invitation felt like completing a circle, speaking to young architects who would inherit the climate challenges my generation had created, but also the tools and knowledge to solve them. "The most important lesson I can share," I told the graduating class, "is that your authentic voice, the one that might feel too bold, too innovative, too challenging to existing systems, is exactly what the world needs. Don't hide your light to make others comfortable. Don't diminish your vision to fit existing frameworks. Build something worthy of your highest aspirations." After the ceremony, a young woman approached, Maria Gonzalez, who had been selected as the recipient of this year's Martinez Foundation Scholarship. "Miss Martinez, I wanted to thank you personally. Your story gave me the courage to pursue sustainable design, even when my professors suggested I focus on more practical specializations." Watching Maria's determination reminded me why the Foundation's work mattered. Every scholarship, every mentorship connection, every grant for innovative research was an investment in a future where talented women wouldn't need to hide their capabilities or apologize for their ambitions. As I returned to my apartment that evening, a penthouse I'd designed myself with views of both the Hudson River and Central Park, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me here. The woman Jordan had tried to abandon had become the woman the world wanted to learn from. My phone displayed a final text of the day, from Amelie: "Tomorrow's schedule, 9 a.m. meeting with the Secretary of Housing about national sustainability standards, 2 p.m. interview with Architectural Review, 4 p.m. Foundation Board meeting." Also, Your TED Talk just hit 60 million views. I smiled, setting the phone aside and opening my laptop to review plans for next month's project, a carbon-negative housing development that would serve as a prototype for climate refugee resettlement. The work continued, and Lauren Martinez was exactly where she belonged, building the future she'd always envisioned, one sustainable structure at a time. The marriage was a distant memory, the empire was eternal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.